I had felt for a long time that something in our life had gone wrong. In our marriage, but I couldn't understand what exactly. Emma had changed, as if she had begun living in another world. It was something that had gradually built up. I didn't notice it right away because she was still there. But over time, I started to feel that what used to be familiar had changed. One day, when I came home, I noticed that her gaze was cold, and her responses were monosyllabic. We weren't talking like we used to. "Are you okay? You're changing." "I don't understand," I said. "It's fine, I'm just tired." "You've had tough days." "I have too," she replied. But I felt that it wasn't everything. She didn't look tired, she looked distant. It was something more than just tiredness. "Are you sure? We can talk about it. I notice you're becoming more distant," I said. "No need, please. Everything's fine. You're just making things up." She waved it off. I tried to understand what was happening. We used to never imagine a day without communication. But now, her silence was becoming a deafening barrier, hiding her secrets. She often sat in her room, absorbed in something on her phone's screen. When I used to come home, she would greet me with a smile, joy in her eyes. We would cook dinner together, talk about how our day went. But now everything had changed. Emma spent more time on her phone, ignoring me. "Did you find something on your phone that's so consuming?" I asked. "It's not important. Just work messages," she replied, not looking away from the screen. But I saw how her expression changed, how her mood slowly slipped away from me. She had always been more open before, but now something in her had become closed off. I tried to talk to her, but she always brushed me off. "Emma, you're not telling me what's going on with you." "I'm worried," I said. "It's just a bit complicated." "Don't worry," she replied. But how could I not worry? I felt like something important was slipping away from me, and she wouldn't let me understand it at first. I thought it was just tiredness. In the last few months, work had taken up a lot of our time. I was absorbed in projects and career plans. We were both sinking into the everyday routine, forgetting that once we had dreamed of something more. I was planning for the future, hoping that one day Emma and I would return to what we had before. But what did she want? I didn't know. One day, I came home earlier than usual. I thought I'd surprise her, make the evening special. I bought her favorite wine, prepared her favorite dishes, set everything on the table to create an atmosphere. I hoped it would bring us back to the past, to those days when we were truly happy. But when I opened the door, the house was empty. I put down the bags and walked through the house, hoping to find her. Maybe she was just running late. But she wasn't there. I glanced into the kitchen and noticed her phone. It was lying on the table, the screen was on, and that's when, almost by accident, I saw a new message pop up on the screen. My heart stopped for a second. It was a message from Luke. At first, I didn't understand what it meant, but when I read it, a coldness gripped me. Today was magical. When will we see each other again? The message read. My body tensed. Luke. This person had been her friend, and I had always thought their relationship was harmless. I didn't see anything wrong with it. But now, panic began to engulf me. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but something inside me forced me to continue. I opened the conversation. With each new message, I felt the ground slipping away beneath me. Photos where Emma looked different from how she looked at home. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling, her face lit up with happiness. You make me happy, Luke wrote. You make me feel alive, she replied. These words, I remembered how long it had been since I'd heard them from her. My fingers trembled as I read them. I could feel a fog clouding my mind. Why hadn't I noticed this before? I threw the phone on the table and rushed outside. My thoughts were spinning, and I didn't know where to go. One word echoed in my head, betrayal. With Luke, I wanted to believe it was just a mistake, but everything inside me screamed that it was true. When I came back home, Emma was already there. She was standing by the door, and her gaze immediately gave it away. She knew. She knew that I had figured it out. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I looked at her, and at that moment, I no longer saw the woman I once loved. I saw a stranger. I didn't know what to do, what to say. "We need to talk," I said. Emma fell silent, her gaze becoming evasive and uncertain. "You know I can't just explain," she said. "I can't wait for explanations anymore. Did you think I wouldn't see what's happening? Did you think I didn't notice?" I asked. She turned away, taking a step back, as if trying to escape the truth, but I couldn't let her go. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt all my emotions gathering in one sharp moment. She couldn't escape what I knew. It's already been said. We can't keep living like this, Emma. You chose him. You chose him over me, I said, looking at her. I looked at her and realized that maybe she didn't know what to do either. The silence hung in the air like a heavy curtain, and it seemed as though even the light in the room dimmed under its weight. I stood there, not knowing what to do, and looked at her as though she were a stranger. Emma slowly approached me, her steps unsure, as if she didn't understand what was happening either. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She stopped just a few centimeters from me, not touching me, as if I could hurt her. I saw her eyes drift across my face, but there was none of the warmth or light in them that once seemed so natural. Instead, all I saw in her eyes was pain, the pain of realizing that she had lost me, and I had lost her. We had both lost ourselves in this silence. I tried to find words, to say something, but what could I say? At some point, I realized that my words couldn't bring back what was gone. I just stood next to her, feeling the cold creeping through my body. Before, I could have hugged her, told her everything would be okay. But now that seemed impossible. Thoughts raced through my mind, but they all boiled down to one question that kept pounding in my chest: how could she? How could she do this to me? I thought I knew her, that I knew what she needed. But now, all I knew was that none of it mattered. Emma didn't answer. She lowered her gaze, stepped aside, and sat on the couch. Her body, like her soul, seemed lifeless. I saw her shoulders tense, as though she were trying to hide from everything that had happened, but it was too late to hide. All I felt was despair, and I didn't know how to fight it. We were both prisoners of this silence, each of us trapped in our own world of pain. I still stood there, not knowing what to say, as though even words could cause more harm. After what seemed like an eternity of silence, I felt myself torn apart by questions that had no answers. I couldn't keep them inside any longer. I suddenly asked, why? This question was the only thing left between us, but it felt like an accusation. It was filled with the pain I felt, and the madness that consumed me. I waited for her answer, but she didn't immediately look up. When she finally did, her eyes were full of tears. I saw how she struggled with herself, with what she had done. There was no certainty in her gaze. I could feel how hard it was for her to look at me, and how she wanted to justify what had happened, but her words didn't come. I felt so alone. Jason, you were always busy, always caught up in your work. I tried to connect with you, but you were always retreating into your job. I started looking for it somewhere else. Her voice was soft, almost fading. It wasn't a scream, or an outburst of emotion, but a cold confession that cut me like a knife. Emma's words pierced my chest like ice shards. I tried to understand what she was saying, but it seemed impossible. I, too, had been lonely. I, too, needed her support, her attention. I tried to understand how we had drifted apart. All I could do was look at her and try to hear what she was saying. I felt the pain growing inside me, but I couldn't stop asking. Didn't you see me at all? Didn't you see that I was lonely too? I couldn't hold back the pain that exploded out of me. You could have just told me you needed more of me. We always talked about everything, even when it was hard. Why didn't you say anything? Emma turned away, her eyes filled with tears, and I saw her gripping her hands on her knees, trying not to let the feelings escape. She wanted to say something, but remained silent. Her face twisted in pain, but there was no certainty in her eyes. I saw how she didn't understand what had happened. I couldn't, Jason. You were so consumed by your work that I didn't even know how to tell you. I felt invisible. Her words were a blow to me, and I felt my heart contract in my chest. I didn't know what to say in return. I wanted to shout that I didn't know how to help her, that I hadn't seen how she was slipping away from my life. But instead, I asked, and that's when you decided to go to someone else. You thought it would help. Luke, was he the one who could replace me? I took a step forward, but then stopped. I felt how hard it was for me to speak. My words sounded weak, as if I didn't believe in them myself. I tried to understand how she could so easily give herself to someone else, how she could leave everything we had built just to be with him. She didn't look at me, and I saw her lips tremble. She couldn't answer. The silence between us grew even thicker. I took another step forward, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her justification anymore. All I felt was deep disappointment. You don't think that's a betrayal? I continued, but my voice grew weaker, as though with every word I was losing strength. You just betrayed me, Emma. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. She tried to say something, but couldn't. I stood there, feeling how the pain in my chest became almost unbearable. I couldn't understand what was happening. How did we get here so quickly? How could she change everything we had built? I don't know what to do, she said finally, her voice trembling. I don't know what would be best. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My thoughts were like shattered glass, scattered in every direction, and the only thing I could feel was emptiness. You don't know what to do. I repeated her words, not believing she was serious. Emma, you've already made your decision. We both know what you chose. But I can't forget this. I can't forgive. Her shoulders shook, and I saw that she was on the verge of breaking down again. But nothing new happened. The silence grew even more deafening, like an impenetrable wall. We stood there, as though on opposite sides of a chasm, not knowing how to take a step toward each other. I felt my heart fill with rage, but also with the same emptiness. We stood in silence for what seemed like forever, only her tears and heavy breathing breaking it. Everything seemed so absurd, as if time had frozen, and we were both stuck in this dead end, not knowing how to get out. I tried to find the words that could give me strength, that could help me understand how we had gotten here, but in the end, it all came down to one thing. I didn't know what to do with what had happened. The silence once again filled the space between us, and I understood. Our life would never be the same. You're just leaving, aren't you? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. You don't want to fight for us anymore. But she remained silent, and that was her answer. The silence that came after her last response was unbearably deafening, heavy. It didn't just surround us, it consumed us, like the ocean swallowing everything that enters its waters. We stood, unable to look each other in the eye. This wasn't just silence, it was something greater, like the space between us had become an insurmountable barrier that we couldn't break down. We both seemed lost in this moment, not knowing what to do or how to continue. It was hard to breathe, as if the air in the room had become too dense, pressing down on me, preventing me from moving a single step forward. Every breath was labored, as if every exhale could destroy everything that still remained, making final what was already on the edge. I felt the silence penetrate me. It wasn't just emptiness, it was like thick, wet milk pulling me in, drowning me in darkness and unbearable weight. I couldn't understand how we had gotten to this point. Just recently, everything had been different. My mind was filled with hundreds of questions, but they had no answers. How had we lost each other like this? How had we become strangers so easily? We had been part of each other, and now, I felt how difficult it was to hold all of this inside, and I couldn't understand what to do with this grief that filled my soul. Everything we had seemed so fragile and unreliable that I couldn't believe how quickly we had come to this moment. The silence stretched on. It wasn't just in the air. It had become part of us. We stood facing each other, like two people who no longer knew how to speak, how to build bridges between themselves. This feeling was destructive, to see someone who had once been close but now seemed entirely foreign. Unable to bear it, I spoke again, though my words were like an explosion. I knew that, perhaps, they wouldn't change anything, but I needed to say everything. Everything I felt, all the pain that squeezed me. Do you really think you can just forget about this? I shouted, feeling my voice crack as if I were losing control. Do you think, sorry, will somehow fix everything? Do you think it can bring us back? We're not who we were. We've destroyed what was between us and nothing will come back. Everything that connected us, it's not just a mistake. It's the end, Emma. She lifted her gaze, but her eyes were full of tears. I saw her trying to hold it together, her body trembling with each suppressed impulse. She fought what she couldn't hide, but there was exhaustion on her face. Deep, deep exhaustion. I saw that she couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. Or maybe she didn't want to. We were so far apart now that all she could offer was silence. I don't know, she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, but in it, I could hear all her despair. I didn't know what to do. I felt like we were strangers to each other. You were always busy, and I was just there. I tried to be your support, tried to hold on, but at some point, I realized it was all a lie. I couldn't keep living like this. I felt us drifting apart, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get back what we had. Those words hit me like a blow to the chest. I felt them penetrate me like a knife, but with each word, I lost her more. How could we have become strangers so easily? We had been part of each other, shared everything we had, and now her words sounded like a sentence. I couldn't understand how everything could be destroyed so quickly. Didn't you see me? I blurted out, and in my voice was not just pain, but utter confusion. Do you think it was easier for me? I felt lonely too. Do you think I didn't try to be there? I tried, Emma. You could have just told me that you needed more attention. You could have told me something was wrong. But you didn't. You just went to him. To Luke. You left, without telling me you needed more than I could give you. She clenched her lips, trying to swallow the pain, but I saw her body tremble. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they couldn't change anything. I knew that even if she said, sorry, 1,000 times, it wouldn't be enough. We had lost each other. Everything we built, it was all in the past. Now we couldn't go back. Don't you understand that this is betrayal? I continued, feeling my breath growing heavier. My voice cracked from tension, but inside, everything was dead. You left, Emma. You just left me, like we meant nothing to each other. We built everything together, and you just left. You took it all and destroyed it. How could you? The tears rolling down her cheeks couldn't change what had been destroyed. All that remained was silence and fear. We both stood there, not knowing what to do. We were so far apart that we couldn't find a way back. We had lost our connection, and with every word, I felt that rift growing wider. I can't forgive, Emma, I said, and my voice was as cold as ice. You don't know how much this hurts. You can't just leave, and then come back thinking that everything can be fixed with, sorry. We can't go back, you know that. She stood silent, unable to answer. I stood before her, feeling as my hopes and dreams crumbled. We were like two ships that had once sailed in the same direction, but now, stranded in different worlds, could no longer find each other. "You just don't want to fight for us, do you?" I asked, whispering, though I already knew the answer. We both understood that we had lost everything we once had. We both knew we couldn't get back what we destroyed. The silence pressed down on us even harder. We both stood there, condemning each other to loneliness. And in this silence, there was something final, as if every step, every word no longer mattered. We had lost each other. All that remained was the emptiness between us. An emptiness that could not be filled with anything. The night passed, but it brought no peace. The morning came, but with it came neither hope nor relief. On the contrary, everything seemed even heavier. We sat at the table, but between us was an invisible wall, so strong and solid that I could hardly breathe. We were both there, yet at the same time so distant from each other that I didn't even know how to start a conversation that would be honest and true. We were lost, and there was no need to speak that out loud. It was felt in the air, in every glance, in every movement. I watched her, her face, her eyes, which had once been full of warmth and hope. Now, there was only emptiness, and that emptiness tore at me. I tried to find even the smallest spark of what had been before, but I couldn't. In her eyes, there was no trace of the person who had once meant so much to me. I sat there, unsure of what to say, trying to understand what was happening to us. How had it come to this, that two people who had once been so close had now become strangers? Emma sat still, looking out the window. Maybe she was looking for answers there. Maybe she hoped to find something that would bring us back. But I knew that we both understood. There was no way back. Time had passed, and we found ourselves at this point where everything between us had been destroyed. And then the phone rang. A sound I knew but feared. Emma's phone buzzed, and although it sounded like any other ring, at that moment it became deafening. It was not just a sound. It was a symbol of everything we had lost. Emma glanced at the screen, and her face changed. For a moment, she froze, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the phone. I saw her face shift, saw the last warmth fade from her eyes. She just flinched, and I knew who was writing. "I'm still here if you want to talk. Luke." These words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I didn't know what I was feeling at that moment. It was as if everything suddenly became clear, yet at the same time unbearably painful. Luke, he was part of her life, part of her present, and probably part of her future. I looked at her, and in her gaze, there were no reproaches, no pity, only that same emptiness. She couldn't hide her emotions, though she tried. There was no resolve, no regret. It was just a fact. And it hurt. I couldn't stay silent. My heart raced, and I felt the words tearing to get out, unable to stay hidden any longer. "Are you going to reply to him?" I said, and my voice sounded as though I were shouting in the silence. But I knew that for her, it wasn't as important as it was for me. I couldn't hide the pain that pierced me, and all I could say were these words. I could no longer be silent. Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked at me, and I saw her eyes fill with tears again. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't. This silence became unbearable. This silence was saying more than any words could. We were so far apart that we couldn't find a way back. "I don't know," she finally spoke, her voice soft, as if she were speaking not for me but for herself. I can't explain this. Everything I wanted now seems impossible. I can't keep being here. I don't know how to do it. It's all broken. And I don't know how to go back." Her words passed through me like a blade. They left an emptiness where there had once been any chance. I couldn't answer her. I didn't know what to say. I had hoped for a different answer, maybe something that could bring back even a glimmer of hope. But her words were an admission. An admission that we had both lost everything. An admission that for her, there was no way back. And for me, too. You've already made your decision, haven't you? My voice carried bitterness that I couldn't hide. You've already made your choice. You don't want to fight. You don't want to get back what we had. Emma fell silent again, her gaze once more fixed on the phone screen. And I knew. It was decided. It was her choice, even though she hadn't said the words aloud. We were on different paths, and nothing could bring us back to the one we once shared. We had become strangers, and it was clear. We didn't need to say it, but we both knew. I stood up from the table. Everything I had once known was slipping away like sand through my fingers. I walked to my room, but even there was no relief. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do. I felt how every step took me further from the life that had once seemed so real and solid just recently. Emma remained sitting at the table, absorbed in her thoughts, not trying to stop me. Everything that had been between us was crumbling before our eyes, and we both saw it. You don't see in me the person you loved anymore, do you? I whispered, but she no longer heard me, or perhaps, she didn't want to hear. In her gaze, there was no pain, no regret. There was only emptiness, an emptiness that filled everything around. I felt how all our dreams, everything we had built, collapsed. That house we had once believed in was now just empty walls. Everything that remained of our relationship had been lost in a moment that could never be turned back. The dreams we had once cherished now seemed so distant and impossible, like stars too far away to reach. I realized that we could no longer be who we once were. We had lost each other. And perhaps, she had already lost me long ago. We sat in the room, separated by an invisible wall, and each moment felt like a heavy burden that could not be shaken off. The morning came, but it brought no relief, only more silence. We were both there, but it was as if we were on different planets, on opposite shores of a river that once connected us. The silence between us grew unbearable, like an emptiness that couldn't be filled. I looked at her, trying to find even the slightest reflection of the Emma I once knew. But her eyes were empty. No light, no hope, only coldness that spread between us. She sat by the window, as always, and I knew her gaze was not directed at the world outside, but somewhere far away, where I wasn't, where there was no us. Are you still thinking about him? I finally broke the silence, though the answer was obvious. But I could not stay silent any longer. This silence was tearing me apart from the inside. She didn't answer, her gaze still fixed on the window. I knew she had heard me, but she couldn't or didn't want to respond. I felt the pain tightening my heart, but I couldn't stop. Emma, I said, moving closer, still trying to reach her. We once said we'd go through everything together. Where is it all? Where are our dreams, our words? Do you remember how we used to sit up all night, planning our future? Where is it? Her eyes finally turned to me, but there was no warmth in them, the kind I once sought. They were cold, full of confusion, as if she couldn't find an answer to my questions. She sighed, and in that moment, I felt all our years, everything we had built, fall apart into pieces. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, her voice so soft I felt it wasn't really hers, just floating in the air. It's all broken, and I don't know how to fix it. We can't go back. I felt something inside me break. She wasn't just saying words. She was telling the truth I had feared to hear. We truly couldn't go back. Everything that had connected us was gone. Our dreams, our plans, it all crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. You've already decided, haven't you? I asked, though I knew the answer. You don't want to fight anymore. She remained silent, her gaze falling again on the phone on the table. It wasn't by chance. I knew who was on the other side of that screen. Luke. His name, his messages, it had all become an insistent, unavoidable reminder that her heart had already chosen. You don't want to fight because you've already chosen. You've chosen him, I said, feeling the weight of the words crushing my heart. She lifted her eyes, but there was no fire in them, no spark I once saw. She looked tired, disappointed. Perhaps she wanted to say something, but couldn't. Or maybe she didn't want to. I didn't choose, she said quietly, but I knew it was a lie. I can't anymore. It's all broken, and I don't know how to fix it. Her words seemed to drain everything from me. We were no longer the people who could build something together. We were broken, each in our own way. And the more I tried to ignore it, the clearer it became. Our love was in the past. I stepped back, feeling something inside me grow cold. Everything I wanted now seemed impossible. We had lost each other, and that fact was irreparable. You don't see in me the person you loved anymore, do you? I whispered, not expecting an answer. But she no longer heard me. There was no me in her eyes. We had become strangers to each other. I turned to the door. Every step I took felt meaningless. But I knew I had to leave. We were on different paths, and we both felt it. Emma, I said, standing by the door, but not turning around. I don't know what will happen next, but I can't be a part of this anymore. We're too far apart. The silence became deafening, like lead. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the door close behind me, and with each sound of it, I felt something finally slip away. I walked out of the house, without looking back. And perhaps, that was the best thing I could do.